you so much for clicking on my video and watching it. My name is Alyssa. This is my channel. It's called On Wednesdays We Talk Murder. So that's what we're going to be doing today. The case that we're going to be covering is the Killing Cousins. Sorry if you hear any noise. My dogs have been going crazy, but if they do bark, I'll try to take a pause so that none of the story gets lost. But thank you so much for clicking on my video. I really hope you guys enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, please like, share, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. It really would mean the world to me, actually. So on my channel also, what I'm going to be doing when I tell these stories is I'm going to be also doing my makeup, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. So if you like makeup and true crime, maybe this might be something that you enjoy as well. I really hope so. So yeah, we're gonna dive right into it. So today's case, like I said, is the Killing Cousins. I chose this case because when I was growing up, I did hear a lot about it. Just very short stories. They're there's this guy that lived where I live. You'll find out where, but he lived in the same area as me. And this was in the 60s, so I definitely wasn't alive for any of this, but it was a hometown horror story that they told all the kids to make them behave, which I suppose it did work. It worked, so they did get us. But anyways, so David Allen Gore was born on August 21st of 1963 in Indian River County. I couldn't find his exact location of birth, but Indian River County, Florida. I believe he was born in Vero, because that is where the rest of the case actually takes place. So growing up, David didn't really have a lot of background information that I could find for this case. So his background is going to be a little bit short, as well as Fred's, just because I really struggled. I took hours out of my time to specifically go and try and find some about his background, and I still came up completely empty-handed. So I'll give you the information that I have. If you guys find any information, please let me know where you got it so I can be more thorough in my research, because I sucked on this one. But anyways, so David was the oldest of two. He had a younger sister named Wendy. She was a couple years younger than him, and we'll come back to her later in the story, let's put it that way. And then his parents. So when I was looking this up, I tried to find some information on his parents just to see where he would have gotten these tendencies from, and I couldn't find their names anywhere. So anytime I looked up his parents, it was just unnamed woman 1 and unnamed man 1, and that's what they refer to his parents as. So I don't know their names, don't know anything about them at all, actually. I just know that they had 2 kids, one named Wendy and one named David. So David was a pretty big dude. He ended up being 6 foot tall, which 6 foot. I'm wondering about every 6 foot. No, that's terrible. But he was 6 foot tall and about 275 pounds, so a pretty big sized dude, you know. Pretty intimidating, can easily overpower a woman of most sizes. Not gonna say that every woman, but most women he could easily take down because of his size and weight. So in high school, it was noted that he and his cousin Fred, on their report cards from PE, it was put in there. The teacher noted that they would sit and stare at girls during gym class. The entire class just fucking sit there and stare at them and be creeps. I just feel there's such an intense creep level to where you have to be over the line for a high school PE teacher, because no offense to PE teachers, but I feel they're a little creepy. But I feel for a high school PE teacher to say something about some boys staring at girls in gym class, I feel every guy does that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel that's a pretty common thing for guys to look at the girls while they're in gym. So for the gym teacher to put it on the report card that they were staring at them so often was just very interesting to me. Another interesting fact was that David failed gym all 4 years of high school. Every single year of high school, he failed gym. I really don't know how. I really wish I did. I don't know how gym was back then, but when I was in high school, all you had to do was show up, basically, and you passed. And if you didn't pass freshman year, you took it again sophomore year, and it was somehow easier, and then you passed, and you didn't have to take it anymore. I don't know if it's like that everywhere, or if that's just here, or I don't know, but I thought that was very, very strange, and just like a red flag. Like, how do you fail it 4 times in a row? You know? Moving on. I'll stop talking about how he was a creep. So when he was about 16, because Fred's a year younger than him. We'll get to Fred after this slide, but Fred's a year younger than him. And when they were about like the 16 to 18 year range, David ended up holding down his sister while Fred raped her, which is just like absolutely terrible. I don't even know. I didn't find any information on if she reported it or anything like that, but I'm assuming that she didn't. And it's just freaking terrible. Like, your cousin and your brother. Seriously, like, stop being pieces of shit. You know? Like, just be a better person. Please. Please. So, they end up raping Wendy, and after that, he didn't end up graduating from high school. I couldn't find if he got his GED or anything, but I know for a fact that he dropped out of school and didn't get his high school diploma. So now he's already out of school, graduated, didn't graduate, dropped out. He ends up getting a job at a local gas station, and when he gets this job, he decides in David Gore's brain that it's a good idea to drill a hole in between the men's restroom and the women's restroom at work. And he ended up being caught, and when he was caught, he ended up being fired. But I just want to say, like, I mean, I guess people are into, like, potty time. I don't know what to call it, but, like, potty stuff, you know what I mean? But it's just in the bathroom. Gross. Terrible. So he ended up getting fired. And now I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Fred, just as background before we get into the main part of the story. So Fred was born on September 29th, 1952. And he was born in New Jersey, which also makes him a Libra. Oh, I forgot to mention that David is a Leo. But he is a Libra. And until he was about 10 years old, he really didn't have that good of a relationship with his father because he worked for NASA as an engineer, which is just like, okay, you're a freaking aerospace engineer for NASA? Hell yes, get your fucking money, dog. So proud of him. I don't even know this man, but heck yes, it's a badass job. I wish I had any sort of freaking talent like that, but I don't. So yeah, I thought that was very interesting, but since he worked at NASA, he was gone a lot, and he really didn't come home and see Fred that much, and that's also why they ended up moving to Florida, was for his dad's job, and he ended up living in Florida. He grew up in Florida, I should say, and he ended up going to Vero Beach High School, which is the high school in Vero, the only one that's like public. I guess there's 2 of them, but it doesn't matter. So the public high school in Vero, which has about, I'd say like 6,000 kids right now. I don't know how many it had then because it did expand, and the old high school is now just for freshmen, but there couldn't have been more than, I would say, like 1,000 kids in all 4 grades then. But he was said to be very attractive, very popular, very likable, and was a football star. And then it was also said that, which I just want to know, like, what kind of conversations they're having with these freaking people. It was said that he had a short temper and a appetite for violent sex. That's a quote. In high school, you have an appetite for violent sex? And I just want to say, like, who is he having these conversations with to where when you're in high school, you're like, yeah, I like violent sex, and nobody takes it as a red flag. You know what I mean? I just feel like that's just red flag number one. So in 1974, David was 21, and he got married to a woman named Donna Blanigan, and she gave birth to their first child that year. It was a boy. I couldn't find out what the name was, but it was a boy. And then the year after that, he ends up separating from Barbara. So in 1975, he's now 22, and he ends up marrying a woman named Connie Jean Ayers, and they stay together for about a year. And then the year after that, in 1976, he ends up getting a divorce from Connie. And I'm not going to go into Fred's relationships and stuff like that, just because they end up dating a lot of the same, or a lot of women with the same name, so I didn't want to confuse you guys. So if you want, I can link it down below about what he was doing at this time, but I'm just not going to say it because it's not really that pertinent to the overall story, you know what I mean? So in 1976, this is a very important part. They decide that they're going to come together. So David and Fred come together and they have a talk about their interests, because they have a lot of the same interests, you know, creeping on girls, staring at them, being weirdos. Great fun together, I guess. They come together and Fred gives him a proposition saying that they should go and hunt girls together. And I say hunt, and that was quoted. So they will go and hunt girls together to satisfy their sexual needs and desires. And if David's willing to go along with it, he won't tell anybody, Fred won't tell anybody, they'll be all good. So David's like, yeah, you know, why not? He agrees to it. So he's like, okay, let's go do it. The same night that David agrees to go along with Fred's plan, they end up going out to Yeehaw Junction, which is a little bit, I believe it's west of Vero. It's like out in the middle of nowhere, and it sounds exactly like its name. Yes, so there's not really much out there, but there are a couple of bars, and they end up going to a bar and they see a woman who's by herself, and they wait outside, and Fred has a rifle at this point, and he tries to shoot her car tires so that she can't get away, so that they can attack her, but she ends up getting away on foot, which is just like, I don't understand how she can get away on foot if they have a gun and there's two of them and they flatten her tires, but whatever. So their first attempt ends up being a failure. It's not their first one, or it's not going to be their last failure, because it's not going to be their last one, because these dudes are fucking idiots. So she ends up getting away, and the same night they just weren't satisfied with not having a successful hunt. So they were not happy with that, so they decide that when they're driving back to Vero, they see a woman driving south from Vero, so they decide they're going to follow her. So they end up following her all the way to Miami, which I just want to make a freaking point here. Miami's 4 hours away from Vero. 4. I don't know if, I'm assuming that they didn't know that she was going to go all the way to Miami. They just thought that she was going to pull over maybe in like West Palm Beach or something. But she ends up driving all the way to Miami, which is 4 hours away. And she ends up parking on a busy street. And her choosing this parking spot, which was on this busy street, was enough for them to abandon her, give up. They drove back to Vero after. When she parked on that busy street and they saw that, they were like, we gotta go home. So they drove to 4 hours back to Vero after that. So now, same day, 2 fails, 2 strikes. You know, to me, if I was doing this, not that I would ever do this, and I failed twice in one day, the same day that I confronted my cousin to try and help me do this, I would just give up, because obviously, to me, those 2 failed attempts mean that I'm not supposed to be doing this, you know, along with so many other red flags. That just means to me that maybe this isn't what I should be doing. But no, they don't take that as that. They say, you know what, 2 failures, Edison didn't stop. He failed 1,000 times before he got the light bulb. So you know what, maybe it'll take us 1,000 times, but we're gonna do it. I don't know if they actually said all that, but that's I like to think that that's what they said. That's the conversation they had. Idiots. They don't stay together for long though. 3 years after they get remarried, David becomes an auxiliary cop. I don't know if you guys know what that is. Does anybody know what that is? Auxiliary cop? I didn't know what it was, so I gave it a quick little Goog, and what Google told me wasn't very helpful, I guess. I mean, it sort of gave me an idea of what it was, but it wasn't like cut and dry. So what I got, Urban Dictionary helped me out a little bit too. So what I got is basically they're like volunteers. They can be paid or unpaid. I don't know if they were paid at this time, but they're paid or unpaid. They're always volunteers, and they get a badge. I don't know if they get a gun. I couldn't find any information on that, but they do get a badge, and basically what they do is they're just there to help in the community for like non-threatening occurrences that happen that people may need help with. So like, for example, an example that I found, literally the only example that I found, was if there's like a parade or something, or a cat stuck in a tree, or like just any event, they would come out and like do traffic for it, or keep the peace, or like if there's a protest, they'd just be out there for like a police, whatever. They're not actually cops, like they don't have any actual authority. I don't know if they can arrest you, but they're not real cops. They're just like volunteer police officers. So he becomes that, and this becomes a very important part to the rest of the story because it really redefines David's role and what he can do in this partnership that they now have. So David becomes an auxiliary cop. The year after, he ends up separating from Donna, and this time they separate, it's over. They do not end up getting back together at all. They stay separated until the end of their days. Okay, Donna, good girl, you got out. That same year, Fred ends up calling David, and he's still living in Orlando at this time, and in Orlando he owns at an auto body shop that he works at and owns it, and he also lives there as well. It was like a apartment style thing, I guess. And he has a conversation with David similar to the other conversation that he had, but in this one, the proposition that he gives David is, for every girl that you can bring me, so every girl that David can bring to Fred, Fred will pay David $1,000 for that girl. So David's like, why not? You know, I'm already doing this with you. I might as well get paid, I guess. So David's like, yeah, you know, I'll help you out. No problem, cuz I got you. You know, we take care of family here. So shortly after this conversation happens and David divorces from Donna permanently, he ends up stalking his first victim. So his first victim, her name is Yingling. She was 17 years old, and she was going to school at Vero Beach High School, and she was super smart, like so smart. She was an award-winning math scholar, and she left school that day, got on the bus like normal, and started to go home. And when she got off of the bus, she was greeted by none other than David. And David flashed his badge and was like, hey, do you need a ride home? I can give you a ride home. And Ying was like, you know, nothing to suspect here. It's a cop. I don't know why I shouldn't trust him. So she gets in the car, and as soon as she's in the car, David pulls a gun out on her and says, you're going to tell me where you live, we're going to go to your house, or I'm going to kill you and your whole family. So Ying ends up giving him directions to her house. They arrive at her house, and she goes inside and gets her mother. I already gotta apologize because I know I'm gonna pronounce this so wrong. I am so sorry. Hai Sing, Sion, Hai Sing. That's what we're gonna go with. I listen to a lot of things on YouTube, but I'm still an idiot, so I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm very sorry. I will put it on the screen. I will do better next time, okay? I'm sorry. So they go and get her mom, and her mom gets in the car, and David takes them to the orange field that he works at. Remember, or his dad worked at. Because remember, his dad was a hunter, and he also worked as a hand at an orange grove. So he takes her to an orange grove, or both of them to an orange grove. And while they're there, he calls Fred and is like, hey Fred, I'm at the orange grove. I have some girls for you if you want to come down, you know. But Fred's still in Orlando at this time, and Orlando's about a 2-hour drive from Vero, depending on traffic, like 1.5 hours, 2-hour drive, just depending on traffic, how fast you're driving, whatever. But so he's like, hey, you want to come down? I got these girls for you. Fred's like, yeah. So David is like, let me do something while I wait this 1.5 to 2 hours for Fred to get here. So David ends up tying up Ying, sorry. He ties up Ying and starts to rape her mother. And while this is happening, Fred's still on the way down, and when Fred arrives, he sees the girls and looks at the mom first and sees that she's older. She is 48, and just immediately knows that he does not want her and he's not going to pay for her. So he ties her up. I think they said he tied her up on the back of the truck, so she was like on the bed of the truck, like on the ground, sitting in front of the bed of the truck, and she was tied up somehow to the bed of the truck. But he tied her up and started raping Ying. And when he started doing that, the way that he tied her up, he ended up tying her up in such a way that when she was struggling trying to help Ying, she ended up suffocating herself, and that's how she died. So the mom is now dead, but Ying is still alive, and she's being raped by Fred and David at this point. And when David is done, or when they're both done with her, Fred looks at David and says, quote, "Get rid of her," end quote. And he hands David $400 for Ying, because he did not want the mom, but he gave him $400. So David is like, okay, let me do my part in this, and get rid of the bodies. So David ends up scrambling, trying to get rid of these bodies. And what he ends up doing is he takes both of them and puts them into 30-gallon, these giant white metal pesticide containers. They're like drums. And he ends up putting them in there. Each of their bodies went in their own one, and then he ends up burying them in the orange grove. So that's where they end up staying for a little bit, and David goes on with his life. So Ying's father, his name was Pu Ling. He was an inspector at a packaging plant in the local area, and they were all Taiwanese immigrants. So when he noticed that his wife and daughter weren't home, he went to the police immediately and filed a missing persons report, which is, yes, that is what you do. Whenever this happens, please freaking don't wait the 24 hours or whatever, because listen, okay, the police do not have to wait 24 hours, okay? I know this. I've worked at 2 jobs now that I've sent police to my door because I no-called, no-showed 4 hours after I was supposed to be there. So, what's the excuse? I want to know. See something, say something. That's what it's called, yeah. June 19th or June 14th of 1981, they end up trying to abduct a woman named Donna Strung. I couldn't find out any information on this one at all. I don't know if it's like a closed case or sealed or something like that, but I couldn't find out her name until the last source I looked at, and everything else, it just said like victim B is what she was referred to as, but they ended up failing. So that's failure number 3. 3 strikes, you're out. Please take your asses home and stop with this nonsense. I really wish they would have freaking taken that as an omen for them to stop doing what they're doing, but they didn't. So about a month after they try to abduct Dana, David is in Vero, and he is on the beach side. Sorry, Vero Beach is like on the beach, and there's like a river that runs through it too, the Indian River Lagoon, so it's like you could live on the river, on either side of the river, or you could live on beach side. I don't know why I'm telling you this, it doesn't matter. So David was in Vero at this point, and he decided that he was going to go for, I don't know if he was hunting or just going on an adventure, but there's a place called Round Island in Vero, in between Vero and Fort Pierce, I believe, and This woman, her name was Judy Daly. She was 35. She was a resident of Fort Pierce, which is just the town south of Vero, but she was living in California at the time, so she was just back to visit. She was at Round Island, and David saw her, and sorry, there's a leaf on my floor right now, and it's moving around in a circle. My AC's not running. So David sees Judy, and he decides that he's gonna play his hunting game, and he goes and disables her car, and his plan is he's gonna disable it and act like he's a good Samaritan and offer her a ride to the nearest phone. So he goes and disables her car. She comes over, tries to get in her car, it's not working. He comes over, hey, do you need a ride somewhere? I can give you a ride, no problem. So she ends up getting in the car with him, and he offers to give her a ride to the nearest telephone so that she can call somebody. So after she's in the car, he pulls a gun on her and ties her up and ends up taking her to the orange grove where they've done their previous hunts. And while he's there, he calls Fred, tells Fred about the victim that he has now captured, and tells him to come on down to Vero. So Fred starts driving from Orlando to Vero, and when he gets there, it's been said that Fred had an attraction to blondes, like that was his type, but he had been, quote, craving a blonde, end quote. And since David was able to give him this, he ends up raping her and then hands David $1,500 for Judy because she was a blonde. And then after he gives David this money, he tells David to, quote, get rid of her, end quote. So David ends up getting rid of her body and moving on to his next victim. Hopefully moving on to his next victim, I should say. So in November of 1981, David fell under suspicion by the police department that he worked at because a man had come forward with a complaint saying that an officer had tried to pull over his daughter on a rural road to hold her for questioning. And after this went out, after the complaint was submitted, the police department got it and they started looking for David. And they end up finding him in the backseat of a woman's car with a gun, handcuffs, and his police scanner. So when they find David, he is arrested for trespassing, and he is charged with that, and he ends up going to court, and they ended up giving him a 5-year sentence for the armed trespass, but he only ended up serving about a year of this. I believe he served from December of that year to November of the next year, so only like 11 months, a little bit short of a full year. But after he is released from prison, he is allowed to go into a halfway house, and he ends up staying at the halfway house for about 137 days. So I'm going to do my eyes and then I'll be right back. So when David was being convicted, the judge recommended that he seek psychiatric help while in prison, but he denied it. I just thought that was an interesting part to mention because I personally believe he really does need it. And why not get it for free? But no, he denied it because he's a freaking idiot. Why else, you know? So when he gets released from prison, it is now about April of 1983. Fred ends up moving from Orlando to Vero with his little girly friend. So yeah, Fred ends up moving from Orlando to Vero with his friend Mary Ann Schlidwater. I think that's how you say it. I hope that's how you say it. So Fred and David are now both living in Vero Beach. So very close together, even more reason for them to go on hunts, you know, and find their next victims, is what they're thinking in their mind. So when Fred moves to Vero, it just really makes it a lot easier for them to go on their hunts and find their victims, like I said. So they really start going at it at this point. So they really change their MO from abducting people from locations to really just getting them off the side of the road. So they were picking up hitchhikers. So their first hitchhiker that they end up picking up is a sex worker in Orlando, and they try to abduct her at gunpoint, but she ends up getting away also. So that's is that 4 or 5? I think that's 4 women that end up escaping these cousins because they suck so freaking bad. So she ends up getting away, but again, you know, just like at Yeehaw Junction, they're not gonna take no for an answer. So that same day, they end up picking up 2 girls. They were both 14 years old. One's name was Anchka Lavelle, and the other one's name was Barbara Byers, who went by Barbie. So they pick these 2 girls up off the side of the road. They're on I-95 in Broward County, which is pretty close to Vero. As soon as they get into the car, David pulls a gun out on them and ties them both up and puts them in the backseat of the van that they were driving. And who's in the backseat of that van, you ask? None other than freaking Fred. And David said that Fred made sure that David was driving when they had these 2 girls in their van because he wanted to have as much time with them as he could. So David is driving, and they are on their way back to Vero now. And Fred is in the back seat of the car with the girls. And while they are driving, Fred ends up raping them. And when they get to their location, Fred looks at David and says his most favoriteest line ever: "Get rid of them." So David ends up shooting both the girls in the head and disposes of their bodies. So sad. Just freaking, people are disgusting. Why? Why are people just freaking terrible all the time for no reason? Freaking idiots. I hate people. So about 2 months after they end up abducting Angelica and Barbie, they go on the hunt again, and they are on the highway again trying to see if there's any hitchhikers that they can possibly pick up, and they come across 17-year-old Lynn Elliott and her friend who she was hitchhiking with, who was 14-year-old Reagan Martin. And they get into the car, and it's basically the same thing that always happens with them, except this time, instead of just taking them to the citrus grove or doing it in a car along the side of the road, they end up taking them to David's parents' house. And the reason why he did this is because his parents were vacationing, so they were out of town, so the house was just open. So once they get to the house, they take them inside, and Fred starts raping them, both the girls. And when he decides that he is done and he has had his fun, he doesn't want to partake anymore, he tells David to get rid of them, and he leaves the house. So it is now just David and Lynn and Reagan at his house by himself because Fred has left. And while they are in David's custody, I will say, keeps raping them, or at least attempting to. But at this point, Lynn has managed to escape. So she is now running down the driveway of his parents' house naked, and her hands are tied in front of her, and David is running out of the house trying to catch up with her, to try and stop her. He is naked as well, but he also has a gun in his hand. So they're running down the driveway, and Lynn ends up tripping and falling down, which unfortunately gives David enough time to catch up to her. And when he does, she's laying on the ground with her hands in front of her tied. He ends up shooting her point blank twice. But luckily, a neighborhood boy was outside at this time and saw and heard exactly what happened. So he saw David shoot Lynn in the head, and he goes home and tells his mom, and his mom ends up calling the cops. Yes, thank the Lord. See something, say something, please. So ends up calling the cops. The cops show up at his parents' house, and so the cops show up at his parents' house, and they come up to the driveway, and as they're walking up to the driveway, they see a car that's parked in the driveway. And how many times am I going to say driveway? So they see a car parked in the driveway, and they go up to the trunk of it, and they can see that there's fresh blood, they said, pouring out of the back of this car. So they open up the trunk, and they find Lynn Elliott's body huddled up in a little ball with 2 gunshot wounds to her head and neck. So after they find her body, they start a standoff with David, which only ends up lasting about 90 minutes to like an hour and a half. And after this, David gives up and is arrested, and when he's arrested, they go inside the house and they end up finding her friend who was 14, remember Reagan Martin. Reagan was naked in the attic with her hands were wrapped up, and then her legs were wrapped up with an electrical cord. But she thankfully did end up surviving, and David is now arrested. But at this point, they only know about Lynn Elliott's murder. They don't know about anybody else's murder that's connected to this case. On August 10th, 1983, David is formally charged with first-degree murder and 2 counts of kidnapping and 2 counts of sexual battery. And a couple months after that, so it's now December, he makes a deal with police that he will help find the bodies of his victims in exchange for a plea deal. So on December 17th, 1983, David ends up helping police. He leads them to the citrus grove where he buried the Lings. So the police and all of their searchers are taken out to this grove, and they uncover the 2 30-gallon white metal pesticide barrels, and inside they end up finding the remains of the Lings. So now David has 3 murders attached to him that the police know of at this point. So the same day that they find the Lings bodies, same day that they find the Lings bodies, they end up finding Barbie Byers' body. So that's good. At least her family can have some closure knowing where she is. Because at this point they didn't know where she was. She was just a missing person. So at least they can have some sort of closure, I guess. In November of that year, so it's now November of 1983, David ends up taking some police officers and some recovery, I don't know what you would call them, he just ends up taking the authorities to a citrus grove where he disposed of Barbie and Byers' body. So they end up finding that just days before his trial for the murder of Lynn Elliott. His trial ended up getting moved from Vero to St. Petersburg. I don't know, I couldn't find why it got moved, but it ended up getting moved from Vero Beach to St. Petersburg, Florida. And a couple months after the trial, well, not after the trial, a couple months after it got moved, the trial heads forth, and they end up finding him guilty of the 2 counts of sexual assault, 2 counts of kidnapping, and the murder of Lynn Elliott. So he's found guilty on all of those charges, and the jury, in an 11-1 vote, they ended up giving him the death sentence. In April of that year, so in April of 1984, David ends up making another deal with police that he will testify against Fred, and plead guilty, and then accept the life sentences for the other murders instead of getting more death sentences. But can somebody tell me, if you get sentenced the death penalty, can you get another death penalty on top of that, or do you just get life sentences? Because I couldn't find out any information about it, and I'm actually very curious about that, and about his whole plea deal in general, because it just didn't make all that much sense to me. In April 31st of 1984, David ends up making a deal with authorities saying that he will testify on behalf of, or testify against his cousin Fred. And for this, he will just get life sentences for the other murders, not death penalties. In June of 1984, David gave the police a tip about the whereabouts of Judy Daly's body, and from that tip they end up going out to a citrus grove and they find her remains out there. So at this point he's now admitted to the Lynn's murders, Judy Daly's murder, Barbie Byers' murder, not Angelica or Reagan, because Reagan didn't die, but also Lynn Elliott's murder. October of 1984, he also confessed to kidnapping, stalking, and murdering Judy Daly when he was a auxiliary deputy for Indian River Sheriff's Department. And he admits to disabling her car. The whole story, he tells police the whole story of how he got her in the car, what he did to her, what he did to her body, all of that. So in January of the following year, so January of 1985, Fred is finally convicted of, or charged with murder for his part in the murders of Lynn Elliott and then also Barbie Byers and Angelica Lavelle. And he ends up being convicted and sentenced to 2 life sentences with 2 continuous life sentences, so one after another, and then he has to serve 50 years before chance of parole. So yes, heck yes, good news. So the next month, so in February of 1985, David ends up receiving a similar sentence for his role in the murders as well, so he's given life sentences as well. So at this point he has 2 life sentences and the death penalty. Which, listen, how does that work? How does it work? Can you be given 1 death penalty for 1 crime? Like, what if he would have been given the death penalty for his part in like the Byers-Lavelle murders? Like, what would happen then? Does it matter? Can you give somebody more than 1 death penalty? I don't know. How does that work? So David ends up really fucking himself over because he has a big ass mouth and can't keep quiet. And what ends up happening is, I don't know if you guys know this, but a lot of people when they're in jail and they're serial murderers or just like a cult fan, I don't really know how else to describe it, like Charles Manson and like Richard Ramirez and like Ted Bundy, all those people had like such a cult like following around them because they were serial killers, and women were just like so amazed by them, and they used to have like these little pen pals in prison that they would write to, and some of them even actually ended up marrying the women that they were writing to, which is just like, who do you think you are, girls? Like, some of you guys are stupid. Okay, I do not support all women. If you are being a pen pal with a convicted serial murderer, you're a dumb bitch. Okay? Cancel me now. But anyways, so a columnist for, or a reporter for a local newspaper ended up doing, he ended up doing an article about David Allen Gore, and there was like a book about all of the, like with some of the excerpts from his letters and like all of the disgusting things that he was saying to people. But this guy who wrote, who has written about the case before, his name is Russ Lemon. He went to the senator. He ended up having a meeting, not the senator, he ended up having a meeting with the governor, who was Rick Scott at the time, and he talked about the book and like the letters and everything that was happening and all the public like outcry because they like hated this guy, hated him, and hated him even more when he was sending out these disgusting letters. So basically he read Rick Scott a couple excerpts from his letters, and told him all about that, and Rick said that he would look into it, and then that was like the end of their little meeting. But a couple months later, Rick Scott's office kept getting, they said that letters were pouring in with outcries for justice, with wanting his execution date to get moved up. I remember seeing a couple of articles about people who are completely against the death penalty. They don't believe in it at all, wanting his execution date to get moved up because they just felt like he was the most disgusting person they've ever encountered or had the displeasure to see or hear about, and they didn't think that he should have the gift of breath. Of life on earth, you know what I mean? A couple months after all the letters and all of that, after the meeting that they had, Rick Scott ends up signing David Allen Gore's death certificate to move up his execution date. After he signs this, David's execution date gets moved up to April 12, 2012, and at 6:19, David was injected with a lethal mix of drugs, and he died. Not sad, but he died, so good. So after his death, they never ended up finding Angelica Lavelle's body, the 14-year-old, but David Allen Gore said that he dumped it on the side of I-95 in Broward County, but they have never found it. And just some other information that I thought was a little bit interesting. So I want to read you guys an excerpt from one of David's letters, and then I'm going to read you his last words. So, quote, "At the drop of a hat or slip, her stomach open and not think nothing of it. Once I sliced open her stomach, I'd reach in and pull her intestines and all out. Sometimes I'd put all her intestines on the table and dissect each of them just to see what it all looks like. I've probably seen things some doctors haven't." Smiley face. End quote. And when I say smiley face, I don't mean like he did like a little boop, boop, boop on the side of the, you know, like in the lines of paper. No. He drew it and it was like 3 lines thick, all across the paper, a giant smiley face after he wrote this. So yes, in my humble opinion, I believe Rick Scott was right in moving up his execution, because somebody like that, like if you're gonna write things like that even after you're in jail, I just feel like you're not gonna change, and you are the person you are, and you're disgusting, and you deserve to die. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But also I think that the death penalty gives people a little bit of leeway and gives them an out instead of sitting in there and having to rot. So, I don't know. But his last words were, "I want to say to the Elliott family, I am so sorry for the death of your daughter. I am not the same man I was back those 28 years ago. I hope they can find it in their hearts to forgive me." End quote. So, what do you guys think about this? What are your opinions? I personally think that there were so many red flags, but who am I to tell what can happen? Secondly, I think that people's backgrounds need to be looked at more when they are given these sentences. Like, I feel like if they would have found out that David was freaking staring at women all the time and failed gym and got fired from a job for creeping on girls, like, probably when he got arrested the first time, he wouldn't have gotten out in less than a year. What else did we learn from this? Be safe. Please don't hitchhike. I don't know if anybody hitchhikes, but please don't. Carry pepper spray. I don't know if you want to go get that little like cat thing, you know what I mean? It's got like claws, you punch people with it. Get one of those. Get one of those alarms that goes off when you pull it. Like, please be safe. Please. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, share, subscribe, comment any suggestions that you'd like me to do, any cases. Let me know if you like this, hate it, hate my makeup, think my voice is annoying, tell me I'm stupid, I don't know. Interact with me. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.